Good afternoon. My name is Richard Angell. I'm the Director of Progress. Welcome back to this afternoon session of Progress Annual Conference 2018. Thank you for being here and being part of this day and the organisation and making it the success that it is. Thank you for these wonderful speakers to come and join us from different wings of the Labour Party, different parts of our movement, activists, obviously journalists, MPs, and people with real power. So we're really appreciative to them. I want to first say thank you to all of you. I of course want to say that, but I have already said that. But I want to say well done to the people who got elected this week. There's some new Labour councillors in the room. We're really proud of them, and congratulations on their victory. You have got the hardest job in the Labour movement now, because it is a pretty tough time to be governing this country. And of course, you do it at local government without some of the things you take for granted when you get to do it at national government, because you don't get to increase the pie in significant ways. There are bits that you can do, but you have to share the pie and try and make your public services stronger for that and your communities fairer while doing it. So you're doing the toughest job now, and thank you for doing that. One of the nice parts of the culture of the local CLP that I'm a member of is we thank our councillors for the work that they do, and we hold them robustly to account on various issues, and we talk to them about the important issues. But we actually really appreciate their public service, because if they weren't doing it, Tories would be. And that I am appreciative of every day. And also to those people who didn't win their seats, thank you for standing as Labour, thank you for being Labour in that election, thank you for fighting for us. And I know it will feel bitter for those who lost for issues outside of their control, but it is really important that there are Labour candidates on the ballot paper that are putting forward those ideas, and many of you will be back on the council pretty soon, I'm sure, and able to take your communities. And those who aren't will be enjoying their liberation. And this is a session that, the way forward, where next for Labour. I'm going to ask to speak first a very good friend of mine. Somebody who won a seat against the odds and then got an increased majority against all of his expectations, who now in his local authority has more councillors
nicking my speech
than the London Borough of Haringey, which is interesting. Redbridge with 51, Haringey with 45. Read from that what you will. But somebody who I think has been the straight-talking, honest politics on our wing of the Labour Party that we really appreciate. So first up, Wes Streeting. Delegate, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Richard, for that introduction. It's always nice to have someone else blowing my trumpet, but you have stolen a significant portion of my own speech, because I also like blowing my own. But I'd just like to begin by thanking Progress, if that's the right word, for dragging us from our beds 2 days after polling day. There's nowhere we'd rather be than here right now on a sunny day. So let's just get straight into the election results and what they mean. Well, we won control of Plymouth and Kirklees councils. We became the largest party in Trafford, which was previously Conservative Northern Councillor. We gained seats in places we need to win the next general election, like Thurrock, Calder Valley and South Swindon, which, if those results were replicated at a general election, may even see Labour be the largest party. And our results in London were the best since 1971. Now, it's true that we didn't win our most ambitious targets in this city, but that's always the risk you run when you have ambitious targets. But the huge campaigns waged in places like Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea saw gains in Tory heartlands and Labour within just 200 votes of winning in Wandsworth. So as far as I'm concerned, our candidates and the activists who poured their time, effort and energy into supporting them, including my old mate Owen Jones, who's taken a bit of a kick-in on Twitter during the last 48 hours, I think all of them can hold their heads high for the campaigns that they waged in those parts of London and the gains they made. But the aftermath of any election should also be a moment of some serious self-reflection. Last year, voters refused to give any party a majority in Parliament, and the results this week don't seem to suggest that they've changed their minds. The Tories were the net losers overall, but we also lost seats in places where we only recently returned Labour MPs, like in Lincoln and Derby. and in places where we need to gain Labour MPs like Amber Valley, Milton Keynes and Redditch. And let's remember, in this week of all weeks, the Tories lost their Home Secretary over the Windrush scandal in polling week. The Health Secretary announced that women may have died needlessly because of a failure to screen them for breast cancer in polling week. Tory peers have given their government an absolute battering in the House of Lords over Brexit in polling week. And far from being a high watermark, Ed Miliband's results in 2014 came a year before we crashed to one of our worst defeats in history. So we can hardly regard that as genuinely a high watermark. The results of Thursday were neither triumph nor disaster. Some solid performances, but room for necessary improvement if we want to be in government after the next general election. As for our own terrible news coverage this week, let's talk about Barnet. I am so sorry for those brilliant Labour councillors who've lost their seats in a borough that we were aiming to win. I'm also really sorry for those candidates who stood and lost, many of whom campaigned for me and many of them will be known to you, who I think, had they been elected, would have been some of the best Labour councillors in the country. And I'm sorry because these defeats were entirely avoidable and entirely self-inflicted. But most of all, I'm ashamed because I never thought I would see Labour losing seats because of our failure to tackle racism in our ranks. In my own constituency, the Jewish vote collapsed. And let's be clear, our biggest problem with anti-Semitism hasn't been the small number of Jew-hating racists with Labour membership cards, or even the larger number of people who carelessly use anti-Semitic tropes, like comparisons between Jews and Nazis, or about Jewish money, Jewish power, and Jewish influence without realising what they're doing. No, I'm afraid the biggest problem, it seems, has been with those people, including some of the most senior figures in our movement, who've repeatedly denied, downplayed, or dismissed concerns about anti-Semitism as smears, accusing those of us who've repeatedly spoken up for our Jewish constituents of weaponising anti-Semitism. So imagine what Jewish voters thought when a week before polling day, the General Secretary of Britain's largest trade union appeared on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, threatening Labour MPs with deselection for having the temerity to speak out. So, I've got a message for people like Len. When you dismiss concerns about anti-Semitism, you create the conditions in which you allow it to fester. When Jeremy Corbyn accepts that we have a serious problem, why won't you, Len, get behind our leader? And if you think that throwing your weight around like a pound shop Tony Soprano will silence our concerns over anti-Semitism, then you've got another thing coming. Because silence is complicity, and no abuse, intimidation or threats of deselection will stop me from standing up for my constituents in Ilford North, or any other Labour MP from standing up for their constituents either. Okay, there's more. Now, I know I've probably reached my 5-minute limit, but I am going on. I'm sorry, Richard. The people have spoken, Richard. Respect the mandate. On a serious note, and you probably detected my irritation in 200 characters or less in my sleep-deprived state in the last 48 hours, but I have to say I've had just about enough of having my motivations impugned and being told to join the Tories. I won my council seat from the Tories in 2014. I bucked the trend to win Ilford North from the Tories in 2015. And this week we not only won every single target ward in my constituency from the Tories, my borough won more councillors from the Tories than any other Labour authority in Britain. So here's a message for Rachel from Swindon and every other alt-left troll squawking in the swamp box. Instead of telling me to join the Tories, why don't you shut up for a minute and ask me how to beat them? So, how does Labour move forward? Well, together, ideally. As Paul Mason said this week, and I quote, "To win seats in the Midlands and south of England, Labour needs to get even more outside its comfort zone and fight for centrist votes." Now, Paul's right, but like you, I did laugh when I read that, because this is the same Paul Mason who came here last year to sit on that panel and tell us all to go and set up a new centrist party. Of course, we don't need to do that, because centrist parties are a bit like buses, it seems. You wait 30 years for a new one and 3 come along at once. But we should be absolutely clear that these buses are on the road to nowhere. I'm not a centrist. My politics are centre-left. Sure, I've got much in common with Ruth Davidson on social liberalism. I'll happily walk through the voting lobbies with Anna Soubry to stop a Tory hard Brexit. And when Tom Tugendhat, as chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, warns of the threat to our national security posed by Russia, I take him very seriously. But there's a reason that they're in the same party as Jacob Rees-Mogg and Ian Duncan-Smith, and why I'm in the same party as John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn. Because our parties are coalitions of people whose politics have shared roots, even if they occupy different branches. It's why when John McDonnell talks about clamping down on tax havens and money laundering, I'm with him 100% on the Treasury Committee. Or when Kate Ossamore warns of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and the unacceptable actions of the government of Saudi Arabia, I'm in the House of Commons chamber backing her up. For the last 3 years, our coalition inside the Labour Party has fractured, and collectively we've struggled to put it back together. We seem to barely understand each other, which is why we have made the terrible mistake of lumping in so many idealistic, energetic and young new members who want to change the world with old battle-hardened millies from the 1980s who want to carry on the internal fight. And it's why some of them think that centre-left politics is about the pursuit of power without principle or purpose, and Labour under the misguided illusion that they could just eject Social Democrats from the party and still win a general election. I love the Labour Party, which is why I hate to see Labour losing general elections. Only a broad coalition within the party can win the broad coalition of voters that we need to win a general election. So the only question facing every member of the Labour Party is whether we have the collective will to do it. So I want to conclude with some straight-talking, honest politics about the state of the centre-left. With a few exceptions, centre-left parties around the world have taken a battering. We've been routed in internal Labour Party selections, and there's no quick fix or instruction manual that can tell us how to fix it. For too long now, we've been not just out of office, but out of answers too. Mainstream Labour politicians have sounded too much like tinkerers and technocrats, or worse still, sore losers. So let's stop licking our wounds and complaining about somebody else's ideas and start standing up for our own. Our Labour tradition is needed now more than ever in the battle of ideas about the future of Britain beyond Brexit. Across Western democracies, people are sending a clear message to their leaders that they feel left behind, unheard, and increasingly dislocated in a world that is changing around them. They know they've borne the pain of an economic crisis they didn't create, whilst watching those responsible make the biggest gains of the last 10 years. They've seen the hollowing out of traditional industries that provided decent jobs and good prospects for their towns. And they know that their children are growing up with prospects poorer than their parents. We're at the start of an industrial revolution on a pace and scale the world has never seen. It will have a huge impact on the future of work, making the founding mission of the Labour Party more relevant to this century than it was in the last. So in the spirit of the title of the 1945 manifesto, let us face the future and apply our traditional values to the challenges ahead. The values that form the basis of the post-war consensus that founded the welfare state are needed now as we reimagine the modern state for the challenges of the 21st century. And the values that form the basis of international institutions and the NATO alliance are needed once again to forge a new future for Britain on the global stage in an increasingly uncertain world. These are our enduring values: to protect people against the problems they cannot face alone, to protect their rights at work and to spread power, wealth and opportunity, to tackle poverty and climate change and international crime and terrorism, to defeat those who threaten our security, our freedom and our democratic way of life. This isn't a moment for Britain to retreat from the world or for people at our wing of the party to tear up their Labour membership cards and to walk away, or to believe at a moment of crisis for the worst excesses of capitalism that there is no alternative than that which we've experienced for the last 8 years under the Tories. So let's pick ourselves up, dust ourselves down, roll up our sleeves and get stuck into the battle of ideas so that we can inspire people in our party and people across the country and see a Labour government again.
Thank you for that, Wes. The youngest member of Progress is desperately trying to crawl out of the room, though, so you've still got a few people to win over in the room. Next up is Ellie Mayo-Hagan. She is a brilliant writer. If you haven't read her stuff, I recommend you do. You can often read her in The Guardian and many other centre-left or left-wing journals. She does a podcast regularly. I'm now obsessed by a podcast called Agipop with Owen Jones. We're really pleased to have a representative from the new establishment with us today. And please have the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really mean that sincerely. I think I'm like the only person from the Corbyn left who actually messaged Richard and asked to speak. And the reason... and the reason that I did that is because I genuinely find it useful and interesting to have my ideas challenged. So thank you very much for having me today. So I think that a movement is an ecosystem, and my role in that ecosystem is not to talk about data or numbers, because it's like trying to get me to speak ancient Greek. I don't really understand it. So I'm not going to talk about the local election results very much in this speech. Well, not really in terms of data. I'm more interested in where Labour is and where it's going in terms of the sort of global and historical context that we're in at the moment, because we're in a very strange time. And for me, it's more interesting and useful to reflect on where Labour is in that way, rather than kind of the immediate results of the election. So I agree with quite a lot of what Wes said. I also should probably say that I agree with him about Barnet Council as well. I particularly agree with him that social democracy is collapsing all over the world. With a few minor exceptions, it is a dying ideology. I mean, I will use the term social democracy here because that seems to be the one that we're working with. But I think it's been called lots of other things: the third way, centre-leftism, Blairism, Clintonism, whatever you want to call it. You know it when you see it. The ideology, that ideology, it's been dominant for 20 years in politics, and I think it's over. I think that's evident from Western elections all over the world. The reason that I think it's over is because I think the foundational belief of social democracy is that everybody can be a winner, everybody can advance in the same direction, and we don't need to base our society on competing interests, like the old ideologies of the 20th century, communism and fascism. The left is very fond of quoting Peter Mandelson when he responded to the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. He said, "We should be intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich." And the left often throws that quote. Yeah, I'm getting, don't worry, I'm getting to that.
She was getting there, let her give the line.
Don't worry, I'm getting there.
She was being generous.
I'm getting there. So the left often throws that around in this very scandalized way, but it always misses the second part of the quote out. Patience is a virtue. That's not the second part of the quote, but that is true. As long as they pay their taxes. And I think it's actually intellectually lazy to miss out the second part of that quote, because it's the most important bit. And the reason that it's the most important bit is that it's not just expressing a kind of insouciant attitude towards people getting really rich personally. It's expressing a worldview. What Mandelson is arguing in that quote is that you can take the wealth of the rich to sort of make life better for the poor. That's an ideological worldview that he's expressing. And it was expressed by Tony Blair in his leadership speech in 1996 as well, where he said, no more worker against boss, we're all on the same side. And to me, that really is the foundational belief of social democracy. We don't have to compete anymore, we can all be on the same side, we can all advance in the same direction. And I think when you unpick it, what that same direction is the sort of enlargement of the wealth of the super rich that can then be redistributed, taxed and redistributed amongst the poor. I think what the financial crisis did was to upend that ideology. It was to show that the rich was getting rich at the expense of the poor. And I think the problem at that time, I'm actually researching the financial crisis at the moment, and I think it's very striking that there were really no solutions that could be proposed for the financial crisis that didn't really move beyond a very narrow set of ideological principles. The fact that the government bailed out the banks and nationalised Royal Bank of Scotland was really an upending of the ideology that we'd lived under for a very long time that said that you couldn't interfere in the market. So immediately, the kind of principles that we'd lived under sort of were turned on their head very quickly in 2008. But because social democracy has been so dominant in Western politics for so long, there was not really any way of acknowledging that it had died. You know, all of the institutions that might have done that, political parties, the media, think tanks, and so on, they'd all adopted this ideology and they weren't really able to say it was over. And so it sort of carried on for sort of 7 years or so in a kind of zombified form. And I think what we're seeing now is its collapse. And of course, there's one political party that has bucked that trend and has become one of the biggest parties in the Western world, and that's the Labour Party. And I think the reason for that is that it's moved away from social democracy and towards democratic socialism. And that's a force that is in insurgency in lots of international countries. Of course, it isn't the only insurgent force. The far right is also in the insurgency in Hungary and Poland and other places. But I think these are the two ideologies that are now in insurgency, and social democracy is kind of over. So I think if we look at global trends, I don't think that Labour can return to social democracy because I don't think that it matches the sort of political and economic conditions that we live in now. We can't move to the right. We should have learnt by now that adopting right-wing frames only reinforces them and makes people more open to the far right. So I think that Labour needs to build upon and consolidate the gains it's made since the general election, which were really extraordinary and also were thought to be impossible by the same kind of group of people who have called pretty much every major political event wrong over the last 5 years. So I think we need to consolidate on those gains. We did this with the local elections a little, but not enough, I don't think. I think we need to go further. I think the Labour Party manifesto in 2017 was really good, but I see it as more of a base. I think it needs to be built upon, and I don't think it was good enough. So I think the question that Labour needs to answer really now is, what does modern socialism look like? We don't have answers for things like automation, climate change, things like that. Precarious work, we're getting there, but we don't have a coherent enough vision. And those are really the biggest challenges facing the modern world. And I think that we need to sort of answer the question, what does 21st century socialism look like, and how can it respond to those challenges? We need to find answers for those questions. And for me, that is the future of the Labour Party. But then I would say that. Thank you.
Ellie, thank you very much. That was thoughtful and thought-provoking, so I appreciate you setting out that stall in the debate today. So, next up, the most powerful person on the panel, it is the wonderful Clare Coghill. She is the leader of Waltham Forest Council. And if you have not yet had a drink with this woman, you should stay after this event and make sure she comes to the pub, because she is one of the funnest people to chat politics with, particularly when she has a glass of wine in her hand.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody. There's lots of friendly and familiar faces in the room, and it's so lovely to be here. As exhausted as we all are, I think there's a lot of really positive energy here. Wes, what an inspiring speech, what an inspiring story, and you know, we must all take strength from that, and I really appreciate Ellie coming today and sharing her views. There are a couple of places that I wanted to talk about today, including my original home of Dudley and my adoptive home of the glorious borough of Waltham Forest. Yes, fabulous. So I'm the first woman to lead my council, and I'm very proud that this week we achieved the best result we've ever achieved. And whilst we didn't stack up the bodies in quite the way that Redbridge managed, we were taking seats from the Tories in Ian Duncan Smith's constituency, where they are not going to go easily, let me tell you that. We took them by surprise last year. But they will not be caught out now that his majority has been cut back so desperately. They will fight, and they will fight very, very dirty, let me tell you that. And we need to be armed with fresh ideas, real policies, and tangible things that we can do to make a significant difference in people's lives. We got our count done really efficiently in Waltham Forest, which I was very pleased with. So at 3 o'clock we were done and dusted, and I was able then to look outside of the London bubble and start to see what was happening elsewhere in the country. And personally, as someone from Dudley originally, I was devastated to see the result in that authority where we had hoped to make some gains. If we're not able to articulate what we're going to offer people in a really tangible way, then we won't see the progress that we absolutely need to see. And I understand the points that were being made by Ellie in her previous speech, but for me, as someone who is practical, a pragmatist, someone with a big budget, someone with services to be delivered, I don't want to have intangible theoretical conversations on the doorstep about things that people care little or nothing about. When I talk to people, which I do all the time across my borough of 280,000 people, what we hear are real concerns about housing, housing affordability, social care, particularly adult social care, and what we as the Labour Party are going to do about it. And I'm very clear in what I'm going to be doing in the next 4 years as leader of my council. I will be balancing my budget. We have increased council tax by 5% in my borough, as many authorities have done up and down this country, Labour-led authorities. But I will not continue to ask people for more money and more money and more money without having that rigour and discipline internally within our own authority. And that absolutely needs to be delivered, because people elect us to local council chambers up and down the country to be responsible with their money, not to play games and not to lead them down dark, dark, futile alleys. So we're a campaigning authority. I will be campaigning for a new hospital at Whipps Cross. I will be championing the needs of my residents, but I will not be making them promises that I can't keep, and I will not be saying that I will spend all my reserves. Guess what? You can only do that once, and it is folly. And these are the arguments that we need to make. Now, I'm someone who I'm deeply, deeply in love with my party. I love the Labour Party. I have friends in the Labour Party, all in this room and far beyond this room as well. And it's so, so, so important to me. But it's that practical reality of how we get that message across so that we're not just talking to ourselves, but we're out there on the doorstep. So just to finish on the point about where we are in other parts of the country as well. If you get the chance, if you're not from London and you're not campaigning in London, if you get the chance to go out and see what's going on in other parts of the country, please do. But we have to make bigger gains outside of London if we are going to build towards a Labour majority in Parliament. Thank you for listening.
We can all see why so many of your residents put faith in you to run their public services. Next up is Stephen Bush. He is the special correspondent at The New Statesman. He is a contributing editor of Progress. He is a brilliant writer with sometimes frustrating content. And we're really pleased that he's here today. He is a favourite of Progress audiences. So over to you, Stephen.
Thank you. What is next for Labour? Well, not majority government, if Thursday is any guide. Yeah, we need to be honest about that. Yes, the general election does show that if you do not meet your targets for where you need to be to win party, you can turn that around in a short campaign. But I'm afraid I'm going to start with what will not be the last football metaphor. You can concede 2 goals in the first 10 minutes and win sometimes, but let me tell you as an Arsenal fan, you cannot concede 2 goals in the opening 10 minutes and win the league. You cannot bet on doing that every time. You cannot bet on fighting the 2017 election campaign every time if you want to defeat as opposed to merely occasionally frightening the Tories. London was wonderful. In my hometown of Tower Hamlets, you gained astonishing numbers of councils. In my adopted town of Hackney, because I'm just that parochial, I've moved exactly 1 borough to the north. The borough is even more of a one-party state than it was before. There are now no Liberal Democrats at all. I mean, seriously, guys, like, I know it's all fun and games to laugh at the Lib Dems, but when they were in coalition, we were in the EU. I mean, so, yeah, kind of maybe this kind of sectarian tribal Labour thing that you all love doing, maybe we've reached the end of the road for that approach to doing politics. I don't know. I mean, I know it's fashionable to stand up and say, I love the Labour Party. I love my partner. I love Arsenal Football Club. Political parties are about changing the world and moving enduring movements. One of the sort of positive in some places, worrying in other places for you trends was the return of the Lib Dems as a force capable not only of beating the Tories in Remain-heavy, socially liberal areas like Richmond and Kingston, but crucially able to tap into discontent, whether it's, how shall I put it, subpar Labour council in Sunderland, and how shall I put it, subpar council candidates in parts of Haringey. And that's great in Richmond and Kingston, but one of the things which should worry you and should worry the leadership is the Greens gained seats last night, which they were not expecting to do. Right now, there is a problem with the coalition you've built, and it is hard to see where the majority will come from because, as someone once put it, there are no graduates left. But if you cannot even defeat the Green Party, where are your extra gains at the next election going to come from? You have a major and growing small town problem. You have a major and growing problem in areas where Jewish voters cluster in significant numbers. The thing is about those 2 problems, right, is the answer to the second one is quite simple. Take anti-Semitism in the Labour Party seriously. The answer to the question of how the left does better in small towns and outside great cities is not so simple. I would strongly urge you not to merely see it as a question of who your current leader is. It is a problem which besets all of your sister parties and indeed the various upstart parties that have destroyed and replaced some of your sister parties throughout the continent. It seems to be a secular trend that for some reason or another the left is struggling to win outside of great cities. So that's kind of where Labour is from an electoral perspective. From a policy perspective, someone in the shadow cabinet has a good line that I've stolen, which is there's a problem that your manifesto has a lot of spending commitments, which isn't actually the same as a policy programme. So let's take, say, criminal justice, right, where the Conservatives basically believe that there's no problem prison can't solve, that our current drugs policy has worked, And the Labour response is, that's all true, but we should pay prison wardens more. Which, I mean, it's a view. I don't think it's a particularly radical or left-wing one. I think you should be embarrassed, again, I'm going to mention the word Lib Dems and you can all boo again, but you should be embarrassed about the fact that on prison, on drugs, and indeed on tax and spend, Tim Farron had a more radical manifesto on all of those issues than you managed in June 2017. And I think there is, you know, see, they get it. You know, it is also true to say that the financial crisis has upended many of the policy and economic platform of, you know, tired old vanilla social democrats like myself. It's less clear whether or not Labour has escaped that problem, or first past the post merely means that the sort of same vote share isn't quite big enough to supplant the centre-right throughout Europe, has been coagulated under one party's banner. But I feel like the stuff I've said now is kind of the stuff which for the most part is easy for all of you to hear. And like Wes, I'm going to end with some straight talking on his politics. The first thing is every time, and Wes didn't do this, but every time I hear someone, you know, whether you want to call yourself the Labour right, Corbyn skeptics, social democrats, moderates, every time I hear someone from this bit of the Labour Party say what happened to straight talking honest politics, I honestly want to go and lie down in a busy road. Like, straight talking honest politics was a stupid promise. Abandoning it and getting slightly better at the process of doing politics was one of the good things Jeremy Corbyn has done since becoming leader, right? The fact he is more streetwise than he was in September 2015 is a good thing, and is why some of you in the room are still MPs and some of you are still councillors. Because if he had continued to be that naive and callow, you can guarantee that would not be the case. And it just makes you look opportunistic and frankly nasty to be around. Every time you say something like, what happened to this naive approach to doing politics? If only that would come back. Similarly, you need to stop talking about things being divisive. Politics is meant to be divisive. If you don't want to divide people, join a stamp collecting society. Like the reason why I don't like the idea of mandatory reselection is I believe fundamentally in parliamentary democracy, not because I think selection processes are divisive. And ultimately, you know, Dennis Healey, the last time your bit of the party was in opposition, when he went round to constituency parties talking about deselection, he didn't go, it's divisive if you deselect me. He said, I believe in the mixed economy, and I believe in keeping to the economic policy of the Callaghan government, and if you don't like it, bite me. And if you cannot do that, and frankly, most of the time it seems you cannot, why are you in politics? It's very easy to look at some, frankly, subpar local election results and go, oh, why is the leader's office in politics? But ultimately, the one thing that Jeremy Corbyn has shown he can beat and beat reliably is you. Fair point. You know, and you need to be honest about that. You need to be reflective about that. And you need to think very seriously about what that means. Because it is not clear to me it is not at all clear to me what Labour's path to a parliamentary majority is, but it is even less clear to me on your present trajectory what your clear to 50% plus one of the vote is in an NEC election, let alone a leadership election, let alone a meaningful share of the coming elections. And frankly, if we as Social Democrats cannot do better than we are doing at the present time, we cannot ever, with a straight face, say that the Labour leadership is not doing better enough. Not least because because that manifesto is, very keen on spending money on things, less, I think, clear on what, things like a national education service means beyond a slogan. There should be room for an exciting centre-left prospectus based on principles, policies, and what you want to do, as opposed to this rather grim opportunism that feels like it characterises most Corbyn skeptic statements about the Labour leadership at the moment. And if you can't get that right, the answer to that question will be decades of opposition, both internally for you and externally for the whole of the Labour Party. Sorry, I realise I should have ended with some kind of applause line.
That was brilliant, Stephen. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I think that is many of the things a lot of us have thought. The one thing I would seek to clarify is we are not the Labour right, and we don't want to call ourselves the Labour right. We are centre-left of British politics, and we're proud of it. And I think that should be the tone in which we go forward. OK, questions from the audience. You're definitely not getting a question now for that response. Right, yeah, on there. I'm not going to take any more men until I see some women hands. Oh, there we go. Yeah, you go first.
So, Stephen,
say your name and where you're from.
Oh, sorry, it's Mark Jackson from Lewisham Deptford CLP. Stephen, you talk about the problems that Labour is having in small towns. How big of a problem contributing to that do you think is the Londonification of the Labour Party, where 2/3 of the membership now are all based in London, and half of the shadow cabinet, including all of the really senior posts, are all London MPs? How hard do you think that makes it to solve those kind of issues?
My name's Joanne Harding, member of Progress Strategy Board, and fresh from Trafford Council, where we are now the largest group. So my question is to Ellie May, really. Can you tell me what 21st century socialism looks like and is? Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? People on this side of the room? Yep, just there.
I just want to...
say your name, where you're from.
Martin Platt, Holborn and St Pancras. I just want to make one thing clear, Ellie. They wrote us off when they were by Social Democrats when Lenin started killing the Mensheviks. And they wrote us off when Keir Hardie's desperate attempt to stop the First World War failed. Frankly, we're still around, we're still fighting, we're not going anywhere, and frankly, we're going to win in the end.
And there's a woman on this side of the back, right in the back.
Hi, I'm Ashley Dalton, and I'm the PPC for Rochford and Southend East. And my question is to Wes. Wes, please can you come and show me how to beat the Tories in Rochford and Southend East?
Right, who wants to go first? Stephen.
I mean, it doesn't help, but it's not recent. I am, as I said, I live in Hackney. I live in Stoke Newington. So my my MP is your Shadow Home Secretary. Bluntnish is not the first Shadow Home Secretary to live in Stoke Newington. The last one did as well, as indeed did the last Shadow Foreign Secretary, the last Shadow Chancellor, and indeed the Leader of the Opposition did not live far away. So you do have this slight problem that for a long time the Labour Party has been remote from many parts of the country. I don't actually think where Jeremy Corbyn sits in the House of Commons is actually that much of a problem. I think I think your problem is policy-based. There is clearly something about your present policy positions that does not go over well and hasn't gone over well for a long time in places like, and we can all list them, Nuneaton, Swindon, and increasingly goes down poorly in places like Wigan as well. I'm not going to pretend I know what the solution to it is, because if I did, I would earn a lot more money. But it clearly is a problem. But I don't think that it starts with the present leadership, although I don't think the present leadership has made it better.
Ellie.
I guess the comment, it wasn't really a question, but good for you. The question about 21st century socialism was huge, so I'm going to keep it brief. It's actually Karl Marx's 200th birthday today, by the way, so happy birthday to him.
I already wish him happy birthday on Twitter on our behalf.
Socialism is a society run by and for the interests of working people. That is how it's traditionally described. So I suppose the question is, what does that look like in a 21st century world where jobs are being rapidly replaced by automation, where within 50 years' time global temperatures will have gone up by 3 degrees, and I advise you do not Google what that means, because you won't sleep for a week, and I mean that as someone who did. So I suppose what 21st century socialism looks like is, how do we respond to these deep really catastrophes that face Western societies and other societies in a way that ensures that the balance of power resides within kind of working people, working class, and not within the sort of ruling class. That's what how a socialist would answer that question. I can't really give you like a sort of a policy program about that right now, because that feels like a huge thing to answer. But that is the question. That's what it looks like. That's the question that needs answering. And I think that's what the leadership needs to build on and needs to come up with answers to.
And the stuff on the small towns, is that something that you've thought about or written about previously? What is Labour's route through to some of those places?
I think that there is a problem at the moment in British politics, and I think it's the same in America, where there is the sort of increasing polarisation of political parties. Parties are ideologically moving towards the left, and then in this country, the Tories are moving to the left. The Labour Party's, sorry, other way around, the Labour Party is moving to the left, the Tories are moving to the right, which means fewer swing voters. I also think there's a problem between like town and country, which has a lot to do with how our economy is structured, and how Labour resolves that. I'm not sure. I think it's very difficult. My experience of going to these small towns, interviewing people there, is that people are very angry, actually, at the moment, and they feel very disconnected, and they feel that they're not being listened to. They feel that there's a sort of out-of-touch and decadent elite which has been looking after its own interests and not been serving the interests of the people. Obviously, for us, a left or centre-left party like Labour, that should be easy to handle, but also that plays to a lot of far-right ideas. So I think that Labour's, you know, as Clare said, Labour's priority should be to address that anger that people have in these places in a way that is relevant to their daily lives and speaks to their concerns and understands the things that they're worrying about. I think possibly like where I might differ from an organisation like Progress is that I think that maybe the problem that Labour Party has is it's been moving away from what people's real concerns are. Yeah, that's what I would say to that.
One of the things, just to build on that very briefly, is that I thought the manifesto did very well on people's economic insecurities and tried to deal with those. But you particularly find in these small towns voters who are worried about national security. And while the manifesto had the Trident commitment, obviously Jeremy Corbyn doesn't speak to that same understanding, that same empathy, and obviously wouldn't, you know, do stuff like renew Trident weather. Do you think that's one of the reasons that's holding us back going into new areas? So because Paul Mason, for example, would argue all the economic policies of Corbyn, but would be much stronger on national defence, would renew Trident, would commit to NATO spending, etc. Do you think that's a better course than the one we're currently charting?
No, I know Paul thinks that. I disagree with Paul on that. Not really. To be honest, I've never ever met a voter who's brought up NATO ever. Yeah.
Wait.
No, that's not right.
Joe, whoa. Right, okay.
I'm glad that I can be here to represent Corbyn and you can all like get it all out.
Wait. Joe, you're representing yourself and you're not being invited to speak, so please leave it for a second. Right. Wes, you were asked your advice on beating the Tories, and I won't let you indulge for too long on this subject. But.
Yeah, I'm going to come to Rochford and Southend East. So I'm going to Chingford and Woodford Green. I'm going to Thurrock. I'm going to Harlow. I'm really looking forward to getting out of my London-Essex border bubble where we've made it all look far too easy and go around and talk to people about actually how hard it has been to get to where we are now. The best speech I've heard in the last couple of days, apart from with respect to everyone else that I've heard today, Stephen's excellent and necessary challenge to us, was the leader of my council, having gained all of those seats, standing up, thanking volunteers, but then basically talking about the things that voters had complained about to do with the council during the election and showing absolutely no hint of complacency, because we would never have guessed when we gave blood, sweat and tears to win Redbridge for the first time in the borough's history in 2014 that we'd now be on 51 seats with 16 gains. So but we're not complacent, and we're not actually, in spite of my best efforts to demonstrate otherwise, we're not actually that cocky about it either, because it is a lot of hard work. And in politics, again, because this is so hypocritical coming from me, but we do have 2 ears and 1 mouth and should use them in that proportion. So, heeding my own advice, I'm going to just very, very, very briefly just touch on 2 other really related issues. Londonification. If Siobhan McDonnell was here, she would say, hang on a minute, Islington isn't London. And I feel very strongly about that, as my constituency is sort of half London, half Essex, culturally and in all sorts of other ways. I think one of the biggest challenges about having a London-centric shadow cabinet and a London-centric membership isn't that we try to impose our London liberal views on the rest of the country, is that when we talk about how to win over the country, we talk about the North as a monolithic place where everyone thinks the same. And, you know, one of the advantages of sitting with Alison McGovern on the Treasury Committee is that she regularly berates me for doing just this. And, you know, even when we talk about immigration, for example, there isn't a northern view on immigration and a London view on immigration. Come to my hyper-diverse, multicultural borough, and you will get plenty of first, second and third generation migrants complaining about a whole range of things that they believe is to do with immigration, in the same way that there are people across the north of England and the Midlands who actually understand the benefits of immigration, and if presented with a credible immigration policy, would be absolutely behind it. So that, I think, is the risk. The final thing, I was really struck by what Ellie said in her speech earlier about automation, climate change, precarious work, these big issues, and she said, I don't have all of the answers to this. And, you know, when you get someone from another wing of the party saying, well, we don't have the answers, it can be terribly easy to be very smug about saying, oh, you haven't got the answers. I don't think we've got anything like the answers either, but I think there's an agreement that these are really big challenges. And I think that if the Labour Party is going to win the next general election, it does require us to actually have more thoughtful conversations with each other about the answers to this problem and to these challenges. And one of the advantages of having you know, friends on the left of the party is that we can sit over a pint and talk about politics in a more good-natured and inclusive way. The challenge for our party is to replicate that same kind of comradely culture at constituency Labour Party meetings, and dare I say it, within the Parliamentary Labour Party. But that requires a bit more kind of goodwill, good faith, not always deriding each other's motivations or, you know, or sense of good faith. But, you know, as again, I say this with some humility, because we certainly haven't got that right at the PLP, even if I think actually in my constituency party we have got that right. But I think unless we solve that cultural problem in our party, then we're going to be in big trouble on that front.
Clare, I thought you in your speech put those 2 places that you now represent and where you're initially from together as part of Labour's story. And it feels that, you know, the 2017 election, there wasn't really a strategy. It was try and make the most of it. And what came out of it was victories or big improvements in places like Chingford with the Green, but really falling back in places like Dudley. So one of the things that Connor Pope, my colleague, has set out is that one of the reasons why the expectations were in Barnet, Westminster and Wanstead is because they are the kind of seats we would need to win if you're following that strategy. It has 5 marginal seats in those 3 boroughs. You obviously both essentially represent or neighbour Chingford and Woodford Green. What do you think? Do you think there's enough Chingford and Woodford Greens to take the country, or do you think we have to orientate back to, you know, obviously trying to win those where you can, but listening to the people of Dudley, Mansfield, Middle and South East Cleveland, that we lost? And we talk about how much we won at the last election. We never seem to talk about those 5 important seats that Labour lost. Some of them we'd held since 1935.
Absolutely. I think, and I'm so glad that Wes in his remarks didn't just refer to the North, but did refer to the Midlands as well, because we're very, very particular about that. But it's such an important point, so elegantly made as well. I think for me, it's there is a London centricity that is a challenge. But it's about getting out and actually listening to those people. Sitting within Dudley Borough is Halezone and Raleigh Regis, the constituency that I grew up in, which is a bellwether constituency for us and where I've done a lot of campaigning. And you can see that over time. So when I was growing up there in the 80s, the manufacturing base was dying. People were losing work unless their parents, unless people were in the public sector. And that set us on to a trajectory of decline that has pretty much continued. And I think just on Eddie's point, I really appreciate what you're saying about talking about, I understand what you're saying when you're talking about a ruling class versus the working class. But the trouble is, in places like the Midlands where I was just defining socialism. That's what it is. Yeah, no, I understand that. But what I would say about that, I understand it and I absolutely appreciate it. But where I'm from, in communities where I'm from, if you define people as working class, they're often quite offended by that. If I talked to my grandmother as belonging to the working class, this is a woman who lived in a house with 21 other people, a council house with 21 other people, she'd have been disgusted. She didn't want to be defined like that. She wanted her children to go to university. She was prepared to sacrifice everything. She was prepared to do horrible, disgusting, dirty jobs. She was prepared to literally sew until her fingers bled. And so to define her in that way and to take away from her and people like her and the generations who followed her like me, to take away that sense that there would be something that she could aspire to, which would be her children owning their own homes, her granddaughters going to university and being elected, I think is to sort of miss where we need to get to, which is we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with people in these communities and we need to listen really, really, really carefully when they tell us that they think we're wrong, whether that's on the doorstep or whether that's at the ballot box. And they really told us we were wrong at the ballot box in 2017.
I'm afraid our time is up and we have to go to the next lot of sessions. So thank you very much to our excellent panel for sharing their brilliant and thoughtful views.